talking today with Bob Holman of Sparta, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, so Bob, begin at the beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in 1948 in Muskegon.
All right. Did you grow up there?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
Well, my dad was a factory worker. My mom worked at Hardy Herpelsheimer's, a department store down in Muskegon.
Okay. And what high school did you go to?
Well, I graduated from White Cloud.
Okay.
My last 2 years, junior, senior, we moved to White Cloud, and I lived with my dad and my stepmother there.
All right. And when did you graduate?
1966.
Okay. And what did you do after you got out of high school?
Well, my first job was American Seating, working in the factory there, and became a card-carrying member of the United Auto Workers. In fact, in 1967, they went on strike, and I got to walk the picket line on strike. So I worked there until I went in the Air Force.
All right. Now, this is a point when Vietnam was really ramping up. How much attention were you paying to that or to the draft at that time?
Not a lot. It wasn't like the news today where the news is so pervasive on the television, all these different channels. Back then you watch Walter Cronkite, nothing at all. Mm-hmm. And so you knew about it, but not really.
Did you have friends who were drafted?
Oh, absolutely. Our prom, there were 5 of us. We did not have girlfriends, so we all went to the prom together, and after the prom we went bowling, and the first one, Dan, joined the Navy, Jim joined the Army, Alan the Air Force, I joined the Air Force, and Cliff Kelsey, he joined the Marines and was killed in Vietnam.
All right. Now, so did you enlist? So tell me, how and why do you join the Air Force?
The GI Bill to go to college. Back when I was 7 years old, my teacher said, Bob, if you want to go to college, you better figure it out yourself because your parents are not going to be able to help. So I've always had that in the back of my mind, going to college. And in high school, I was pretty much a B and C student, nothing spectacular, but I knew there was some mystical thing out there called college, and I didn't know anybody that went to college, but that's kind of what I wanted to do. Now, if I get drafted, it's for 2 years. And I figured 2 years, you get 2 years of college on the GI Bill. So I figured I better join the Air Force and get 4 years so I can go to 4 years of college and get a college degree. So I went down to the Federal Building in Grand Rapids, stood in line, went through the process with the Air Force recruiter. When you go down to Detroit for your draft physical, it's 2 different things. It was physical to make sure you were physically able, and then they give you a test. And I must have scored pretty good on that test because they assigned me to a delayed enlistment program that I would join the Air Force Reserve for 3 months, and then after that go into the regular Air Force in the specific program called Electronic Communications and Cryptographic Systems Repair. That was the machines that encoded and decoded secret and top secret messages. So they signed me up for that. I went down to San Antonio and basic training, and from there to the technical school.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. In early '68, when you're enlisting, this is the Tet Offensive has started. There's a massive demand for people, and a lot of guys were trying to get into the Navy, the Air Force, the National Guard, anything to get out of having to go to Vietnam as infantry. And a lot of people were trying to get into some of these branches and not getting in. Now, did it help you? Did you have any sense of that at the time?
No.
Okay. Now, when you enlisted in the Air Force, were there options to serve for less than 4 years?
No.
Okay. So basically, when you went there, they were perfectly happy to have you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Because I think a lot of guys didn't really want the 4-year commitment, and that may have helped you a little there. But anyway, okay. So you enlisted, no big deal. You just did this really because that was your own way of thinking. You knew you might get drafted someday.
Oh, I would be drafted. Yeah. I was 1A. That's all there was to it.
Mm-hmm.
They went by birthdays. In your graduating class in high school, you followed their birthdays up, and eventually your birthday would come up, and there you go. So the only reason is the GI Bill. I wanted 4 years of college and 4 years of Air Force. To get 4 years of college, thank you very much.
Okay.
And that's what I did.
All right. So you go to Detroit, you get the physical. Now, how serious was the physical?
I don't remember specifically. You know, you hear all sorts of different stupid stories and things like that, but it was pretty much, can you stand up, can you walk, can you know, can you breathe in your heart, and just stuff like that. Do you have flat feet? Just normal, nothing different than you would do today.
Okay. Did you notice anybody trying to scam the system or?
No, you heard stories, you hear all these different stupid stories, but I didn't see any of myself.
Okay, so just, okay. And then they send you down to San Antonio for basic training. How did they get you down there?
Well, we flew from Detroit. In fact, they put me in charge of I think it was about 12 people. For some reason, they picked me and said, you're sort of in charge, here's the paperwork, and when you get down there, fill it all out and send it in. So we took an airplane, you know, a jet from here to Dallas or Houston, and from there, it was a propeller airplane down to San Antonio, a real small group of people. And I got down there, and you're in the airport in San Antonio, and here comes your drill instructor. Stand up, sit down, lean to the left, lean to the right, do this, do that. And I got my paperwork, and he says, get rid of that, get rid of that. So I turned around and threw it in a trash can behind me. And I always figured the FBI would come knocking on my door someday because I didn't fill out the paperwork. But I never heard another word.
Oh, so they did not need your paperwork later?
Evidently not.
Okay. All right. So now once you arrive at the base, what's the processing like? What do they do with you?
Well, it's pretty standard. You have a drill instructor. In fact, there were two of them, Sergeant Wasik and Sergeant Rady, and they just take and teach you everything you need to know. They march you through the line to get a haircut. They march you through the line to get your uniforms. They march you to the KP, kitchen patrol. They march you here. They march you there. They march you to the testing program. They teach you how to do this. They have the obstacle course where you have to run and jump over all this different stuff. And they have a 1 mile test where you have to run a mile, and just pretty basic stuff. And I played basketball and baseball in high school, so, you know, I was reasonably physically fit. And you just get in line and say yes, sir, and no, sir. Mm-hmm. And it was 6 weeks, not that difficult.
All right. How much emphasis was there on discipline?
Well, I've always been kind of an independent type of person. And, you know, it wasn't like you would think in the Marines or anything like that. It just was not quite like that. But they had some of the Southern boys from, you know, the different Virginia Military Institute and all this here, and they had more of a military mindset. And had this one fellow said, Bob, I'm going to take you outside and teach you a little bit of military discipline, whatever that meant. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I mentioned it, I think, to the drill instructor. And I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he wasn't there anymore. Oh. As in, he wanted to take it upon himself to teach people how to be a correct military person. Mm-hmm. So that was the end of that story.
Okay. Yeah, well, it was the Air Force.
Pardon?
It was the Air Force.
It was the Air Force. So, you know, when you're a Marine, you're always a Marine, and you always absolutely respect the things that they would have done compared with what I would have done. Mm-hmm. There's no comparison. The Air Force was different. Now, I'm in the Veterans Honor Guard here, and I go to funerals and shoot the rifles and the taps, and had 2 of them yesterday, and I probably will have 2 tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And most of them are Marines, and you give them the due respect they deserve, because their experience would have been much different than me. Mm-hmm. Being sent to Camp New Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
All right. So, and how long was your basic training?
6 weeks.
Okay. And then do you stay in San Antonio for the advanced training, or do you go somewhere else?
Well, mine just happened to be at Lackland Air Force Base. So after basic training, they put me on a bus, drove me across the other side of the base, and here's a huge building with no windows. It was all secret and top secret. I had a top secret military clearance, and you went in there, and I was there for about 9 months studying how to repair these advanced electronic machines that encoded and decoded messages.
Okay. Were these early computers, or were they still analog devices of some kind?
Whatever I should or shouldn't, it was the beginning of
Yeah.
digital and things like that. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, by now, it's probably not very sensitive.
Oh, no, it'd be ancient history
Yeah.
as far as electronics is concerned.
All right. And so, and what was life like for you during that 9 months? How did you spend your time?
Well, in fact, a little story. I went to the bowling alley. Well, first off, for the first time, you got to put on your civilian clothes, and I went from 165 pounds to about 215 pounds, just virtually, having 3 meals a day and the exercise and everything else. You just kind of like that. So I went to, I had to put on my civilian clothes, which didn't fit. So I had to get some new civilian clothes, and they had commissaries there for things like that. And I went to the bowling alley, and guess who's flipping hamburgers at the bowling alley? My drill instructor, Sergeant Washik, which was a shock of all shocks, because you figured in basic training, this guy is next to God. I mean, he has the say over what you do and don't do. So here he is flipping. And it was the first time I says, well, he's just kind of a regular person. And he was, and he took a friend and I, we went out through all the honky-tonk bars of San Antonio one night and showed me the sights of San Antonio, and that was fun. So, but it was a shock to see a drill instructor who you absolutely obeyed to being just a regular person.
All right. Well, had he changed jobs, or was he just kind
Oh,
of
no,
doing it
no,
as
that
a...
was part-time, back in the military. Back then, I as a basic training, $100 a month, period. And you had to pay for your haircut, you had to pay for your this and that and everything else, and your toothbrush and toothpaste. You had to buy all this stuff. The only thing you got for free were your uniforms. So $100 did not really go very far. And even for my 4 total years in the Air Force, I made a grand total of $10,000. So that's $2,500 on average a year, but it was actually less than that most of the time when you're, starting out E1, E2, and E3. You don't make much money. So I could easily picture Sergeant Washik needing to supplement his income to support his family.
All right. And let's see, did you get any leave during that time, or get to go home, or
Well,
anything?
the answer is yes. It was 9 months. I did get to go home for Thanksgiving that year. I forget exactly how it worked. My dad at that time lived in Los Angeles, and somehow I figured out how to get an airplane from San Antonio to Los Angeles and was out there 2 weeks. And when I left there, my dad had a Corvair, and he says, here, take this. And so I drove that all the way from Los Angeles back to San Antonio, and had the Corvair in San Antonio, and I used it there. In fact, one of the people was I can't think of his last name right now, Jim, whatever, from Alabama, and him and his wife Diane, they had a baby, and he was there, and he used my car quite a bit because his Ford Falcon quit running, and then eventually I drove it all the way from San Antonio back to Michigan before going overseas. And one of the people that rode with me was John R. Trump. And to this day, I do not know if he's related to the Donald Trump, but it was John R. Trump. So he and I drove the Corvair all the way from San Antonio back to Michigan, and I dropped him off somewhere in Detroit and drove to Lansing to visit my brother and back to White Cloud.
All right. So when did you go overseas?
That would have been about 1 year later, after joining the Air Force.
Yeah.
So somewhere in the springtime in 1969,
Okay.
I would go overseas.
All right. And then how did they get you over there?
Well, first off, a little story. Graduation from the technical school, they called us in a room, and they had a blackboard there with chalk, and they had on there about for 20 of us, all the different assignments: Vietnam, Germany, Hawaii, Greenland, all around the world. And they had one, Camp New Amsterdam. They said, well, put your name in here, and we'll draw names to see who goes where. So they got through the process, and they drew my name. This is the best duty in the United States Air Force. And they picked me to go to Camp New Amsterdam, the Netherlands. So I came back to Michigan and was here about 2 or 3 weeks, whatever it was, and flew from here to New York, and then Pan American from New York to Amsterdam, and somebody in the military was there to meet me at the airport, and they took me to Camp New Amsterdam, the Netherlands,
All right.
which was half American and half Dutch Air Force Base, Soesterberg Air Force Base. And there I would be for the next almost 3 years.
Okay. So you get there. What does your job consist of?
Well, maintaining, repairing the different electronic machines that encoded and decoded the messages.
Okay. And how busy did that keep you?
Not very busy, but you know, you just learned and paid attention and were there. The thing is to be there. You don't call in sick, you don't take a day off because a snow day and all these different things like that. Your job was to be where you were supposed to be, and that's where you were. And whether you were actually doing something or sweeping the floor or washing the windows, that's where you were supposed to be, and you did what was supposed to be done that day.
Okay. So when you first get there, what kind of orientation do you give you, or what do you start doing?
Well, I would have to say zero orientation. You know, you had bosses like Sergeant Furjanic, I think his name was. He was there, but he was leaving in 2 weeks. So, you know, here's your dormitory, and you know, there were barracks at the time, not dormitories and not student living centers. They were barracks, and they said, this is where you're going to be. And there was a room and about 6 people in that room, and they were all in that communications group, telephone repair, different things, teletype operators, whatever it may be. And there you are, and here's the chow hall, and you go there for chow, and you do this here, and this is where the mail is. And so they just taught you all these different things, and it was all walking distance. It wasn't any driving or anything of that. It was all a pretty small area.
Okay. About how many men were in your unit?
I'm going to guess maybe 20
Okay.
in that communication detachment.
All right. And then were there other Air Force personnel there as well?
Oh yeah, they had fighter jets. It was regular Air Force squadron with eventually F-4 Phantom fighter jets, and the pilots coming out of Vietnam would all put in for Camp New Amsterdam and come there, kind of like their reward for serving Vietnam. And so it was a place of high desire. In fact, congressmen. Occasionally somebody had come through, a son my age, let's say, and they were the son of a congressman, and they managed to finagle that they would get to go to Camp New Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and serve their military career there.
All right. Now, how long did you actually spend there?
Probably two and 3/4 years, something
Okay.
like that.
Okay. So pretty much the rest of your enlistment then?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, at that time, what was your daily routine like?
Well, you're on call constantly. Okay, we had a special telephone in the barracks, just in our room, directly from the community, and you were on call for this or that, or they would occasionally have an alert where NATO would go on alert for whatever reason, and they would call us up. One person would go over and get a M16 rifle and bring it back, but it wasn't like everybody's got a gun ready to defend the country or anything, and those things happen. But generally speaking, you got up in the morning, you went into work, and 9, 10 o'clock, we'd all wander down to the NCO hall and get breakfast, and then we'd come back and work, and do whatever. And then the end of the day, we would end the day and go back to the barracks, and generally speaking, the group, we'd play pinochle for hours upon hours, and at midnight we'd get up and go to midnight chow and get it was really good, surprise, but a couple pieces of toast with eggs on top, and the Hamburg gravy, and I think generally speaking people refer to it as SOS. Mm-hmm. And but I liked it, and we'd go to our midnight chow and go back and zonk out and get up in the morning and pretty much repeat the process.
Okay. So you didn't really have shifts where you traded off, but you just
Oh
on call?
no, it was all pretty much daytime shift.
Okay.
And But you were on call 24, you know, the place was open 24 hours and if they needed you, they needed you, and you came in and did whatever is necessary.
All right. Did you deal much with officers or just with your sergeant? Or?
Our Sergeant Pasquale Rosley was a captain and just a nice guy. I hurt my knee one time and I lived off base at that moment in time and I couldn't drive. And so he would stop and pick me up every morning, take me into work and bring me back home in the evening. So, you know, normally that would not be something an officer would do, but it was just, you know, a little more casual, a little, not so military.
Okay, so it's that small unit, and your officer is going to maybe look after you or know you a little better.
Oh yes, he would know us, and yeah, he would look out for us and make sure I didn't get in too much trouble and things like that there.
Okay, now you mentioned living off base. At what point did you move off the base?
Just probably the last year.
Okay.
At the first couple years, I was in the barracks, and eventually, for whatever reason, I don't know why, they say now you can move off base. So you get to move off base, and a friend and I, Eugene from Texas, who was originally from Kentucky, played baseball for Kentucky University. We went and rented a upstairs place in a Dutch residence with Dutch people. So, but we didn't very seldom see them. We paid our money and lived upstairs and went back and forth to work.
Okay, well, I don't know, did you spend much time off base?
Oh yeah. The Air Force has influenced almost everything. I hate the word impact, but it has affected almost everything in my life. And probably the most important thing was, back then there used to be a lot of Heineken beer. We would get out of work on a Friday and go down to the NCO club and they'd put a case of Heineken beer on the table. We'd drink, and then leave there, get on the train and go to Amsterdam and come back Sunday. And that happened off and on. But one time I went to a party and I met a Dutch couple and found out that her family had emigrated from the Netherlands to the United States and they lived in Grand Haven. And I says, oh, if you have a sister, I'll write her a letter. So they gave me the address, and Grace and I wrote letters back and forth for an entire year, came home, and we've been married now 52 years.
Very good. All right, so you just, what possessed you to ask if they had a sister? I mean,
No, just in the normal course of events. Pure luck.
Okay, very good. All right. And how did the Dutch seem to view Americans?
We had no problem. The Dutch people, even now, my wife and I will go back and we have she has relatives there, and a lot of them are probably more knowledgeable about American politics than Americans are. And we go back and we take tour buses, Dutch tour buses, and Grace and I have been to Spain, Portugal, Italy a couple times, Prague, England, Germany, all over. And I remember one time specifically down in somewhere around Regensburg where we were staying at the motel or hotel and on this Dutch tour bus, and there's a German couple there from Dusseldorf. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted. She was a lawyer, and I don't know what he did. I think he was a KGB agent personally, but they seem to know much more about America than a lot of Americans seem to know. And whether it's admiration or I can't really say, but they do pay attention and they do know what's going on in this country.
Well, at least some of them do.
Yeah, quite a few, I think.
All right. Now, you mentioned getting injured. How did that happen?
Okay. I played football one time in my entire life. Never played in high school, never. Now, in the military, you can't run around and associate with everybody, so you have little groups of people that, you know, like I mentioned, Eugene from the University of Kentucky, and he and I got in his Volkswagen and drove to Paris one time, and we drove we got caught in the circle around the Arc de Triomphe and went to the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and all these things like that there. So you had a group of friends, and this group of friends were more athletic, and a lot of them were college people. In fact, one of them played quarterback for the University of Delaware and things like that. And I never played, but they said, Bob, we need you today. Come out, you can just do this here and you'll be okay. So I did that, and the guy says, now run down to the goal line, turn around, pass the ball, and you catch a touchdown. Hooray, hurrah. So I ran down to the 5-yard line, turned around, caught the ball, and as I turned, somebody else tackled me from behind, and they virtually twisted my knee, just separated it. ACL, PCL, and MCL, and meniscus cartilage, the whole 9 yards. And I never had anything hurt so bad my entire life. And the next morning, I kind of hobbled into the, whatever they call it, commissary? Whatever the...
Dispensary, maybe?
Yeah, dispensary. And they put an ace bandage on it and says, good luck. And so about 3 or 4 months after that, I was discharged, because I was discharged. And slow but sure, it just went downhill to the place where I'd wake up in the morning, I couldn't straighten my knee, and eventually I had surgery on it. And then a few other things, and it just went bad to the point where I couldn't even walk. And eventually, through the VA, I had total left knee replacement, and I have loss of feeling in my left foot and restless leg syndrome, and restless trying to sleep at night. And so I was I did not get good medical care from that particular point of view.
Mm-hmm. All right, and at what point did you start getting help from the VA?
Well, when my wife and I, after we'd been married a year or so and graduated from Grand Valley, we moved to California and we lived in Los Angeles. And there's another story I'll tell you about that first, okay? I always used to read the paper, a Sunday paper, page by page by page, and just devour all the information. And one time I'm looking at it, we lived in an apartment in El Monte, and it said, veterans, $100 down for a brand new house in Ontario. So we said, well, let's go take a look. So we went out, and here's all these slabs of concrete they're going to eventually build houses on. We wrote out our check, 8 3/4% interest. 6 weeks later, we moved into a brand spanking new $33,500 house. Every month I came home from work, the big billboard, it went up $1,000. Now, we stayed in California for 2 years, so we moved back to Michigan. I was able to sell that house and take the profits, the gain from that, and buy a house when we moved to Michigan. Mm-hmm. And we used the money from that to buy the house that we currently lived in for 30s. And all that probably would not have happened if I had not read the Sunday paper and been a veteran and
there you go.
saw $100 down. That was it. One check for $100.
Okay. And how does that get us to the VA part?
Okay. So in California, I had to have surgery for my meniscus cartilage. And one thing here in Michigan, the state of Michigan has learned in the past few years. So in the hospital, evidently they had somebody there, a veterans representative, who reviewed everybody that came in. Oh, you're a veteran? And he filed a claim on my behalf, and I became a 10% service-connected veteran. And I remember our very first check, we were in California, $1,600. Oh boy, what, we're like millionaires. Mm-hmm. But every month it started out like $70 a month, and it went up as inflation. So I was a 10% service-connected disabled veteran until finally I had to have total knee replacement. And they made me a 30% service-connected veteran. And then after that, with the restless leg and the nerves and everything, I'm officially a 50% service-connected disabled veteran. I got it on my little, it says service-connected, all because of, I guess you'd call it improper medical care at the time.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, although that did enough damage to you that who knows how well they would have treated it even if they...
Yeah, who knows?
You might have been laid up in traction for 6 months or something.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Fix it, but anyway. Yeah, okay. So once the VA recognizes you, you do pretty well.
Yeah, the veteran, I got my college degree under the GI Bill. I graduated 50 years ago from Grand Valley. And so I got that, and when I graduated, Grace and I were completely 100% debt-free. Didn't owe anybody a penny for any reason. And then buying the house out in California, And my last job that I had was I worked at the Veterans Administration here in Grand Rapids at the VA clinic on Coit Avenue. Not at the home for veterans, that's run by the state, but the clinic is run by the federal government. And so I worked there as a federal government employee for 10 years, and I'm an official federal government retiree.
Okay. So let's back up to your time in the service. Are there particular things that happened or people you knew or experiences you had while you were living in the Netherlands that kind of stand out in your memory that you haven't brought into the story yet? Because you're there for the better part of 3 years.
Yeah, I had a lot of people that kind of looked out for me. I had not ever had anything like this, and like I said, the teacher said, if you want to do this, you're going to have to do it yourself because you're not going to get. And like going to college, and this is the truth. I had no idea what college was like. I thought college was like you studied Latin and Greek and the classics, and that was it. And so I got out of the Air Force. I went to Ferris, and the first thing was history and sociology and different things like that. And it was easy. I had straight A's at Ferris, but then I transferred to Grand Valley because I got tired of hitchhiking from Ferris to Grand Haven to visit my sweetie. Mm-hmm. So I transferred to Grand Valley, and pretty much the same thing there, and I eventually graduated with honors, and so, yeah.
All right.
So, things that happened in the military, okay, people looked out for me for whatever reason. My first boss, when I first got there, it was really kind of different. I had a couple people that were my boss, but they left and went back to the United States. So I was put in charge. I was the only one there with cryptographic systems repair. Mm-hmm. And nobody else. It's like me, all of a sudden here I am, 2 stripes, brand new in the Air Force, and I'm in charge. Mm-hmm. Wow, imagine that. And but eventually they had somebody come in that would be my supervisor, Sergeant Lawson. And I was kind of full of myself, oh, well, look at me, I'm in charge. Oh, I don't need him here. But eventually, Sergeant Wolf took me down to the NCO club, had a beer, and explained to me that, Bob, you're in the military. It doesn't matter who or what or whatever it is. You have a boss, and you will pay that person the proper respect and the dignity due him, okay? Period. That's all there is to it. So it was my responsibility to change my attitude, and I did. And I had some good friends over there, Sergeant Wolfie, and he had a little Triumph MG, and he drove down to, he drove me down to an Air Force base down in Germany, and the NCO club there, and Sergeant Turner, before we went, changed me from a airman 2-stripe into a sergeant, so I would be able to get into the NCO club down there, and went down there, and somebody else, and back at that time they had audio clubs, and you could buy real nice stereo equipment. And so Sergeant Turner, when he drove down, he had a Jaguar, and I says, can you get me one of these and one of these? So he did. He packed it all in his Jaguar and brought it all back. Cost me about 700 buckaroos for this here #1 stereo system, but that's what you did back then. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there were people that looked out for me, and there was the one, Sergeant Allen, I think it was, from Petaluma, California. He was somewhere with another, and they got in a car accident, and he got killed. And Captain Rosalie came to me and said, Bob, I want you to escort the body down to Germany. You can't leave it by itself. You have to have a military escort. Mm-hmm. So I was assigned to ride down and he was in the back there in the coffin and down there and to the place in Germany where he was eventually transported. But that's where my responsibility ended, in Germany. Mm-hmm. But yeah, different things like that, and it was fun. And occasionally I'd get to go and all around the Netherlands, and you learn different things in the windmills and this and that. But I wish I I wish back then I knew what I knew now about European history and stuff like that there, the Battle of Agincourt and this here. But I did eventually get to go visit the Battle of Waterloo. And you know, it's much different than the United States. In the United States, the Civil War battlefields with all the monuments and this and that and everything else like Gettysburg. There, all it is a big pile of dirt, probably 100 feet high, like a cone, and on the top is a lion, I think it is. And that's all there is for the Battle of Waterloo. And you think about it though, why would the Belgian people have a big Waterloo Park there for something they didn't want to have happen? Or why would the Battle of, you know, Austerlitz in Austria, why would the Austrians want to celebrate a Napoleon victory on their side? So they don't, it's just probably different thinking. Why would we do that?
Yeah, you also have more densely populated areas. You know, Waterloo had lots of little villages and things like that, and people's farms and so forth. Are you going to take all that away from them?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right about that. Now, one of the things that you sometimes, you know, will hear about, you're kind of there, latter part of the Vietnam era. Did you pay attention at all to what was going on in Vietnam or the world, or did you just focus on your own world?
Well, they had two things. They had the Stars and Stripes, which was the military newspaper. They had Armed Forces Network, the military radio network. Understand at this time that I probably watched television once. I remember television had Peyton Place on it. The television and news like they have now just was not something. And you got the news as you would hear in this, read in the Stars and Stripes or hear on Armed Forces Network, period. There was no other information, news, or whatever. And so a lot of things going on back here. In fact, I watched, I think it's the Ken Burns thing. I was flabbergasted at all the things that were going on back here while I was over there. I just had no idea that there were all the protests and the student protests. And so when I did get out, they're saying, well, we're going to give you a gas mask and a helmet so that you can take this back when you go to college or for all the protests. And I, you know, it was just something that just never, ever entered my mind that things would be like that. And so I came back and I never saw any protest. I never saw anything like that at either Ferris or Grand Valley.
Well, when did you actually get back?
Okay, I got a early out, 3-month early out. Now the reason I got a 3-month early out is because I wrote a letter to a general down in Germany. I says, they have a bunch of new people here that do the same thing I do. And I would like to get out of the Air Force because my goal is to go to college. And so they did. They let me out 3 months early. So rather than 4 years in the Air Force, it was 3 years, 8 months, and 5 days.
Okay. So
and I got out on December 27th, 1971.
Okay.
And that's another story, okay? Nobody joins the military and basic training between Christmas and New Year's. It doesn't happen, okay? That's all there is to it. It doesn't happen. So at the end of your 4 years, there's nobody getting out between Christmas and New Year's except me and about 15 other guys. I'm getting an honorable discharge. They are not. And I got to be first in every line. And to give you an example, uniforms. When you go in basic training, they give you 2 of these and 4 of those and 3 pair of socks and so much of this and that. And when you get out, you're supposed to account for that. So it was my first, what do you have for uniform? Well, I got 1 or 2 shirts. I think I got a pair of pants with me. You know, and they said, okay, you're all right. The next guys, what do you got? Well, you don't have 6 pair of socks. We have to subtract this. You don't have 2 of the, and everything that they were not able. So I was treated very well being an honorable discharge, and the others were not.
Now, were they from other service branches?
Yeah, wherever they, whatever.
Okay, because to a certain extent, I know that in Germany, at least in the Army, morale wasn't necessarily that good in that period of time. And there were discipline problems and things like that. So in a way, it's not too surprising that some of these guys were getting dishonorable discharges.
Could be, yeah.
But I would take it that with your unit, because of the nature of your unit and the fact that you were on an Air Force base, was morale pretty good?
I'll give you one thing. And I should never ever complain, so I try not to. But one time, for about a week in a row, they served hot dogs and I think that was even over Easter or whatever. And somebody wrote a nasty note and put it on a bulletin board. Now, I don't know why, but the base commander called me in to explain. And it wasn't me. I didn't do it. But, you know, they hopefully picked several different people to bring them in and say, well, what's going on here? And they explained, well, we had hot dogs for like 6 or 7 straight days. And within a day or two, the cook, the chef, was gone. They bought a whole brand new crew in there, and they had a special dinner with prime rib and whatever the case was, and since then it got straightened out. But it wasn't me. I didn't write the note.
Well, given what they did, they may have wanted to find out what was really going on.
Well, yeah.
And you can have mess sergeants, people like that, who skim off the top and
Could be,
serve you hot dogs because
Yep.
they're cheap,
Yep.
and sell the rest on the black market. So who knows what's going on there?
Now, one other thing, Amsterdam, at that time, you know, in fact, there's a statue in the center of Dom Square, okay? And there was a protest going on. Sukarno was Indonesian, whatever, and he was coming for a bill. And they had a huge protest against Sukarno in Indonesia, because there's a lot of Indonesian people, the Dutch West Indies. And so we went down there to see. And so I'm down there with my camera and taking pictures, and the police are trying to rout everybody out. And I bet I'm the only person in the world that has a photograph of Dom Square with no people on it. Not one person at all. And so we got to do things like that.
All right. Now, was Amsterdam kind of a counterculture center in those days?
Oh, I was going to get into the drug business.
Yeah.
So it's a drug place, but it was very, very straightforward, clear, especially somebody like me with top secret clearance. Thou wilt not participate in drugs. And if you do, you are gone immediately. There's no debate whatsoever. And you knew that. And you can drink all the beer you want, have all the Heineken or Grolsch beer or whatever it is you want, but you may not participate in drugs. Now, there was one guy, I don't know what somewhere in the base went down, he got killed, some type of drug deal or whatever down in Amsterdam. So it was a very, very real thing. And so I never did marijuana until I got out of the Air Force up at Ferris, and the group there, they were doing, I said, okay. And that was the only time, except back in 1997, Grace and I went to visit, and we're down in Amsterdam, and you walk through the streets and smell the marijuana, and they have coffee shops, and come on, Grace, let's go see. So we went in, but it was nothing, and never, ever, ever, never, just 2 times in my entire life, just as, hey, I wonder what it is. But in the military, it was made very, very clear. You do not do this. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Anything else you can think of here from that time in the Netherlands that adds to the story?
Yeah, you have different friends. And one group left and another one moves in, and they're more, and so I went to the opera at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. I'd never been. It was a Mozart, the Marriage of Figaro or something. And never been to anything, just something completely different. In the Rijksmuseum, going down there and looking at all the Rembrandt paintings and things of that nature. And you run it, you have different friends at different times, and they come and they go. And so this particular group of friends at the end of my tour had been like in the military, and they came over and they sort of knew what they wanted to do. And it was not go to the NCO club and drink beer until you can't stand up. And that reminds me, Once a year, the Oktoberfest, Heineken beer would come in with Blue Delft beer mugs. Oktoberfest, Camp New Amsterdam, fill them all up with Heineken beer. You can buy it for $1 and keep the beer mug. So I had quite a few of them. I've only got one left, but you'd be able to get Heineken beer in a Heineken beer mug and all for $1 in Oktoberfest. And they do things like that.
Now, as you got toward the end of your, did they make any effort to encourage you to re-enlist?
Oh, yes. I was what they call a VRB, a 4 variable re-enlistment bonus of 4, which I would have got, I think it was like $4,000 or $5,000 cashola right on the spot to re-enlist for 4 more years. But remember, my goal was to go to college. That's why I joined. Yep. Generally speaking, I try to fulfill that goal. And I just knew deep in my heart that the next assignment would not be anywhere near as good. So it would have been all downhill from there.
Okay.
So I said, nope, I'm getting out. And I got out and went to college.
All right. Now, since I teach at Grand Valley and have for a long time, and you went there, what was it like being a student there in the early 70s?
Well, first off, up at Ferris, I went to Ferris for 6 months, lived in a dormitory. They call it the Student Living Center now, but with I think 3 other guys, and one of them was here, and so it was just get up and go to class and come back, and at lunchtime you got to go eat 2 hamburgers because that's what they had for the chow or whatever at lunch, and got tired of that, and I was there pretty much during the week, and you just go to class and listen and write your notes and get ready to come back in 6 weeks and repeat it on a test and go home. So that was, and the same thing with Grand Valley. Now, when I went to Grand Valley, I lived in Grand Haven. Grace and I got married, so I lived in Grand Haven, and I commuted back and forth. So it wasn't like I'm here for all the activities. I think I went to 1 basketball game. I think I went to 1 Blood and Sweat and Tears concert, and that was really about the extent of my involvement in Grand Valley. I just didn't do things like that.
And what did you get a degree in?
Business.
Okay.
You know, back then, they didn't do any career counseling or anything like that. You know, that's just what it was. I figured I'm going to study business for whatever reason. But I wish I'd have done something. I wish I'd have studied history. People say I have a very good memory, and they say I'm a very good teacher. I did substitute teaching for a year about 20 years ago, and I enjoyed it. And then people in Sunday school and everything say, Bob, you need to be a teacher, but you know, I'm way past that. And so I always thought if I had it to do over, I'd be a college history professor. I'd be your competition.
Well, let's see. By now you might be retired, but
So
yeah. Hey, now you could have been a mentor all those years ago. Did you take a history class at Grand Valley?
Oh yeah, I think Grand Valley up at Ferris, but I primarily really got very interested after when we lived in California, and I saw an interview on TV. They were interviewing Will and Ariel Durant, who wrote a book, The Age of Napoleon. And so I went out and bought that book, and it's just fascinating, the French Revolution and all the art and all the history and everything. And I bought the entire series by Will and Ariel Durant, and I just got involved in the American Civil War and a lot of European history and Henry VIII. And so I would read, and put all this stuff in my mind, and that's kind of where it is. And once in a while, you know, I get to share a little bit with somebody here or there, but generally speaking, like the church, they don't have any interest in that, but I do, and I enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, some people do, fortunately. All right. So what kind of job did you have in California?
Out in California, the absolute worst job I ever had in my entire life. I was a foreman at a concrete pipe manufacturing company. They made concrete pipe for all the water control district. You know, I mean, big, huge 24-foot diameter pipe and everything else like that there. And I just had different interests. And so it didn't match. So anyway, I got fired from that job after 2 years, which thankfully very much. And Grace and I were able to pack up our U-Haul and move back to Michigan.
Okay.
And then back in Michigan, I worked at American Seating
Okay.
for the second time because I worked there after high school, and I supervised the truck drivers there, and that was okay. But then an opportunity came up, and I went to Meyer, and I worked at Meyer for almost 18 years, and I was the domestic traffic manager. Every ounce of freight that moved anywhere in the United States from any Meyer location to any vendor was our responsibility to get that transportation done and select the trucking company, contracts, and everything. One time I sat down and I negotiated with UPS, and eventually I'm with something with Fred Meyer. I'm explaining how, well, through this year we're going to save $14 million. And so I did that. And like somebody mentioned, the Fred Meyer Gardens, I was able to, they needed an emergency shipment of chairs from Georgia or whatever, and I made the arrangements to get these chairs shipped up to the Fred Meyer Gardens for the grand opening, and the trucking company donated the transportation cost, and it was something, I forget what it was, a letter from Fred Meyer to this trucking company thanking them. So I did all that stuff. I arranged all the Easter baskets at Easter and all the turkeys at Thanksgiving, and the department I worked in, and I forget the exact number, but I will throw out a round figure, like $50 million in transportation cost a year. So it was a pretty responsible job.
Yeah. And then you moved on from there to the VA?
Well, I left Meyer, and I'm not going to talk about that, but unhappy circumstances, and I was pretty much unemployed for 3 years. And my wife Grace changed from part-time to full-time where she was, so that we had health insurance, and then eventually I got a job at the Ford Museum in the security, being a security guard, which I enjoyed because of the history. And then that company asked me to go to the VA and be the supervisor of security there. And at the VA, eventually I had an opportunity to change from the contracted security company to an official VA employee, which I did, and did that for the last 10 years, and officially retired as a federal government employee. So I'm a very lucky person, and I know it.
All right. Well, the whole thing makes for a pretty good story here. One of the questions I normally ask, and you've kind of answered various parts of it, how do you think your time in the service affected you, or what did you take out of it?
Well, almost everything having to do with my life is a direct result of being in the military. Meeting my wife, going to college, the disability, this and that, buying our first house, everything, working for the VA. It's all a direct result of me deciding that I wanted to join the Air Force to get the GI Bill to get 4 years of college.
All right. Well, it makes a pretty good story. So thanks for coming in and sharing it today.
You're welcome.